Hi, my name is Isolde, and this is the moment I realized I never truly belonged. At my sister's engagement party, I was prepared to endure the usual cold stares, the whispered conversations behind my back. But what I wasn't prepared for was looking down at my name tag and seeing the word staff printed in bold letters. I wasn't a guest, I wasn't family, I was nothing to them. And the worst part, my own husband just stood there, silent. For years, I swallowed my pride, convinced myself that if I just tried hard enough, I would earn their respect. But that night, in front of Boston's elite, they made one thing clear: I would never be one of them. So I made a choice. I walked out. But that was only the beginning. The grand ballroom at the Fairmont shimmered under the golden glow of chandeliers, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the space as Boston's elite moved effortlessly between tables, exchanging pleasantries that meant nothing. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy dress, glancing at my reflection in the glass of a nearby display case. I looked like I belonged here, or at least I had tried to, but the truth had a way of creeping in, pressing against my ribs like a too-tight corset. I wasn't one of them. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest as I scanned the room, searching for Callum. He was deep in conversation with Julius Whitmore, Seraphina's fiancé, who was charming as always, his confidence effortless, his presence magnetic. Unlike Callum, Julius had never made me feel like an outsider. A delicate laugh cut through my thoughts. Seraphina. She was draped in an emerald green gown that was undoubtedly designer, her perfectly curled blonde hair cascading down one shoulder. A ring of admirers surrounded her, hanging on to her every word. The entire night revolved around her, just as she had always wanted. Ah, there you are. Vivienne's voice slithered into my ears before I saw her. My mother-in-law's presence always felt like a shadow I could never quite step out of. She stood beside me, a glass of champagne in hand, her smile as pristine as the pearls around her neck. "I must say, you do clean up well," she said lightly. "That dress almost makes you look like you belong." I didn't react. I had learned to let her words pass over me like a bitter wind. She took a slow sip of her drink. "I assume you're used to working events like these, dear. You are a nurse, after all." I gripped my clutch tighter. From the corner of my eye, I saw Seraphina's group watching us, smirking behind their cocktail glasses. "She's so practical," one of them whispered. "Callum really married beneath him," another murmured. The sting of their words settled into my skin like tiny cuts. I turned to Callum, standing just a few feet away, but he didn't meet my gaze. He had heard them. He had heard his mother, and still, he said nothing. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. This wasn't new, it was just more of the same. A waiter appeared beside me, interrupting the moment. "May I have your name, miss?" I blinked. "Oh, The receptionist at the entrance desk held out a name tag for me. I took it automatically, my fingers brushing against the glossy surface, and then I saw it. Staff. My heart lurched. A slow, sickening wave of realization washed over me as I read it again. Staff. Not Mrs. Hayes, not guest, just staff. Laughter rippled through Seraphina's group. "Oh, what a mix-up," Seraphina said, eyes wide with mock innocence. "But you do serve others, don't you?" My throat burned. I turned to Callum, desperate for him to step in, to do something, but he hesitated. The moment stretched unbearably long, his silence louder than any humiliation Seraphina or Vivienne could ever throw at me. The air around me felt suffocating, the noise of the ballroom fading into a dull hum. The weight of every dinner, every slight, every time I had swallowed my pride to be a part of this family pressed down on me. My fingers clenched around the name tag. Vivienne watched me with a smirk, swirling her champagne. "Oh, don't take it so personally, dear. It's just a joke." Joke. I let out a slow breath. And then I ripped the name tag off my dress, the sound sharp and satisfying in the quiet that had settled around me. I placed it back on the check-in desk, smoothing my dress with deliberate care. Then, without another word, I turned on my heel. As I stepped toward the exit, I heard Callum's voice. Hesitant, uncertain. And in that moment, I knew exactly where I stood in his life. "Isolde, wait!" Callum's voice chased after me, but I had already made my decision. I stepped out into the cold Boston air, my heart hammering in my chest. The ballroom doors shut behind me, muffling the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and Seraphina's delighted whispers. My heels clicked against the pavement as I moved toward the valet stand, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. Callum caught up, grabbing my wrist just before I reached the curb. His grip was firm, desperate. "Please don't just leave like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was just a mistake." I turned to face him, my body trembling, not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of everything that had just happened. The humiliation, the whispers, the way he had stood there and done nothing. A mistake? My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. You saw the name tag, Callum. You saw how they looked at me. I ripped my wrist from his grasp, my chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. And you stood there and said nothing. His jaw tensed. I didn't want to make a scene. A bitter laugh escaped me. You didn't want to make a scene, I repeated, incredulous. They reduced me to a servant at my own sister-in-law's engagement party, and you were worried about making a scene? He raked a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. Isolde, this isn't easy for me either. I took a step back, studying his face. The man I had married, the man I had loved. Why, Callum? I demanded. Why do you let them treat me like this? Like I'm nothing? He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw everything. The truth. The part of our marriage I had refused to acknowledge. I can't just go against my mother. His voice was tight, like the words were being forced out of him. Not like this. I inhaled sharply. Because she controls you, financially. He flinched. It was all the answer I needed. Jesus, Callum. I took another step back, shaking my head in disbelief. So I'm worth less to you than her money? That's not... He cut himself off, exhaling sharply. You know it's more complicated than that. Complicated? My voice cracked. It's actually really simple. You either love me enough to stand up for me, or you don't. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I let out a slow breath, my decision settling over me like a wave. You don't have to choose, Callum, I said, my voice quieter now, because I'm making the choice for you. I reached for my left hand and slowly slid my wedding ring off my finger. Callum's eyes widened. Isolde. I placed it in his palm, curling his fingers over it. Goodbye, Callum. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard his sharp intake of breath, but he didn't stop me. He didn't say a word. I had barely reached the street when shouting erupted from inside the ballroom. I paused, turning just in time to see the heavy double doors swing open. Julius Whitmore stormed outside, his face dark with barely contained fury. Serafina followed close behind, her perfectly composed mask cracking. This is who you are, isn't it? Julius's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Petty, cruel, desperate for validation. Serafina tossed her hair, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. Oh, please, you're overreacting. No, Julius said, shaking his head. I'm finally seeing the truth. A murmur rippled through the guests spilling onto the terrace, their curiosity piqued. Vivienne appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, though I saw the tension in her jaw. Julius turned to the crowd, his voice carrying through the chilly night air. There will be no wedding. I refuse to be part of this family's twisted games. A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. Serafina's face paled. Julius! Wait! But he was already walking away, his mother, Margot, following with a satisfied smirk. Vivienne's fingers twitched around the stem of her champagne flute, her carefully constructed world beginning to fracture before her eyes. And for the first time since stepping into that ballroom, I felt something close to relief. I had walked away. But was it truly over? The city lights blurred as I stood there, gripping my phone, waiting for it to ring. But it didn't. I exhaled, the cold air biting at my skin. My body ached from exhaustion, my mind replaying every moment of the night before. The humiliation, the whispers, the name tag. The way Callum had hesitated when I needed him the most. I wasn't sure why I was expecting him to call. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of hope. Hope that he'd finally choose me, that he'd fight for me the way I had spent years fighting to be part of his world. I swallowed hard and slipped my phone back into my coat pocket. Enough. By the time I reached my hotel room, the weight of the evening settled into my bones. I hadn't planned to stay here, but the thought of returning to the house I shared with Callum felt unbearable. That house wasn't a home anymore. Maybe it never had been. I peeled off my dress and let it pool at my feet, stepping into the hotel robe as I sat at the edge of the bed. My bare ring finger caught my eye. I turned my hand over, tracing the faint indentation where my wedding band used to be. It felt foreign, like I had shed a piece of myself along with it. A lump formed in my throat, but I forced it down. No more tears. The silence of the room was suffocating. No messages, no missed calls. I was done waiting. Callum stood in the grand foyer of the Hayes estate, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The weight of the night had left him drained, his mind still spinning with the image of Isolde walking away. He hadn't followed her. He should have. Now he was here, standing before his mother, who sat poised in the high-backed chair by the fireplace, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. "I assume you've had time to think, darling," Vivian said without looking up. Callum clenched his jaw. "Why did you do it?" His voice was raw. "Why humiliate her like that?" Vivian exhaled softly, finally meeting his gaze. "Because she doesn't belong, Callum. She never has." His stomach twisted. "That wasn't your decision to make." "Oh, but it was," she said, placing her teacup down with a delicate clink. "You've spent years living in two worlds, trying to appease both. That ends now." Callum stiffened. Vivian studied him for a long moment, before leaning back in her chair. "I need to know where your loyalty lies. You have a choice to make." Callum's pulse pounded in his ears. "Stay with her, and you lose everything," she continued. "Choose your family, and I'll ensure your future is secure." A slow, suffocating silence filled the room. Vivian lifted her teacup again, her gaze sharp over the rim. "So, what will it be?" Callum swallowed, his throat dry. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he had an answer. I sat by the hotel window, watching the city buzz below. Boston had never felt more foreign to me. I had spent years trying to carve out a space for myself in Callum's world, trying to prove that I belonged. But the truth was glaring now. I never had. I never would. I exhaled, resting my forehead against the cool glass. I had been waiting for Callum to fight for me, waiting for him to choose me. But why should I keep waiting? I had spent so much of my life making myself smaller for others, dimming my light so I wouldn't outshine the people who wanted me to stay in their shadow. No more. I turned away from the window, reaching for my phone. I wasn't waiting for Callum anymore. The choice had already been made. The moment I stepped onto the plane, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. As the engines roared to life and the city lights of Boston blurred beneath me, a strange sense of peace settled in my chest. For the first time in years, I was untethered. No expectations, no obligations, no more shrinking myself to fit into a world that had never wanted me. I closed my eyes and let my head rest against the seat. I didn't have a plan, not really. I had booked a one-way ticket to New York City without a second thought. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't there, somewhere I could breathe. Boston had been suffocating. Callum had been suffocating. I exhaled, long and slow. By the time the plane touched down at JFK, the weight on my chest had lightened, just a little. A week passed in a blur of movement, long walks through unfamiliar streets, coffee in small corner cafes, the hum of the city filling the silence that had once been Callum's voice in my ear. New York felt like a fresh start. No one here knew me as Callum Hayes' wife, or Vivian Hayes' disappointment of a daughter-in-law. I was just another woman trying to figure out what came next. I sat by the window of a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village, watching the rain drizzle against the glass, the warmth of my coffee cup seeping into my hands. My mind should have been racing with all the things I needed to do. Find a new job, a place to live, build a life outside of the ruins I had left behind. Instead, I just sat there, existing, and it was enough. My phone vibrated on the table, breaking the moment. A number I didn't recognize. For a split second, my heart leapt to the possibility that it was Callum, that he had finally woken up, realized what he had lost, that he... I clenched my jaw. Then, without hesitation, I hit decline. No more waiting. In Boston, Callum stood in the grand library of the Hayes estate, his mother seated elegantly across from him. The tension in the air was suffocating. Vivian sipped her tea, her posture unshaken. "You've had time to think," she said, not a question, but a statement. "I trust you've made the right decision." Callum's hands curled into fists at his sides. For years he had played this game, walked the careful line between duty and desire. He had bent to his mother's will, convinced himself that it was just easier to go along with things rather than fight against them. But he had lost Isolde. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he could live with that. "I'm done, Mother." His voice was steady, unshaken. Vivian's expression didn't falter, but something in her grip on the teacup did. "Darling," she said smoothly, "let's not be dramatic." Callum exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't want your money. I don't want your games. And I sure as hell don't want to be controlled anymore." Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. "You need me," she said simply. Callum's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "I really don't." And just like that, he turned and walked away. Vivian didn't call after him, but as he reached the door, he heard the sharp clink of porcelain hitting the saucer a little too hard. Boston's high society was an unforgiving place. By the end of the week, whispers had begun to spread. Margot Whitmore made sure of it. With Julius's dramatic exit at the engagement party, the carefully constructed image of the flawless Hayes family had begun to splinter. Vivian's invitations to events dried up. Calls from friends went unanswered. Suddenly, the women who had once clung to her every word were too busy to meet for lunch, too occupied to return messages. Money had never been Vivian's only weapon. Her power had always been in her influence. And now, it was slipping through her fingers. She had underestimated the fallout of humiliating the wrong people. She had underestimated me. I sat on the rooftop of my tiny rental apartment, the city stretching out before me in endless waves of light. The phone buzzed beside me. This time, I checked the screen. Callum. My chest tightened. For a long moment, I just stared at the name, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I exhaled, turned the phone face down, and let the night swallow the silence between us. But just because I had moved on didn't mean the past was done with me. New York had become a refuge, a place where I was rebuilding myself piece by piece. I had found a small apartment, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. I had started looking for work again, sending out applications to hospitals and clinics. For the first time in years, I felt like I was the one in control of my life. I sat in a waiting room, my resume clutched in my hands, preparing for an interview at a well-respected hospital in the city. A fresh start. No one here cared about the Hayes name, about where I came from, or about what I had left behind. The moment my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted instinctively. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I hesitated for only a second before swiping to answer. "I was wondering when you'd finally pick up." A familiar voice sneered through the line. "Serafina." My grip on the phone tightened. "You think you can just walk away?" she hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. "After everything you've done?" A slow exhale left my lips. "I haven't done anything, Serafina, and we both know that." "You ruined everything," she snapped. "My engagement, my reputation, my life." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "No, Serafina, you did that all on your own." Her breath came uneven through the line. "You're going to regret this," she spat. I let the silence stretch between us before answering, my voice calm. "Number, I won't." Then I hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward Serafina. Just pity. Boston was no longer kind to Serafina Hayes. The moment Julius walked away from the engagement, the carefully curated world she had built around herself began to crumble. Her so-called friends no longer answered her messages. Her social media following plummeted. Invitations stopped arriving. The expensive lifestyle she had flaunted, the designer dresses, the lavish vacations, suddenly felt hollow without an audience to admire them. For years, she had lived in a bubble where she was adored, envied. Now she was just another scandal, another cautionary tale whispered about at charity galas. And she blamed me for all of it. The glass in her hand shook as she took another sip of champagne, curled up in the dimly lit lounge of her mother's estate. "They should be humiliating her," she muttered under her breath. "Not me." Vivian, standing at the window, barely glanced at her. "Composure, Serafina," she said coolly. "Whining won't fix anything." Serafina scoffed. "And what's your plan, mother? Sit there and pretend this isn't happening? That Julius's family isn't dragging our name through the mud?" Vivian's fingers twitched around her glass, but her voice remained controlled. "Julius and Margot can make as much noise as they like. It doesn't matter." Serafina let out a bitter laugh. "You really think that?" She reached for her phone, swiping through article after article, all plastered with headlines about the Hayes downfall. Vivian's gaze flickered, and for the first time in years, Serafina saw something in her mother's eyes that she never had before. Doubt. The headlines broke the next morning. Boston socialite, Vivian Hayes, under investigation for financial misconduct. Hayes family fortune, under scrutiny, millions in question, former business partners come forward. Vivian Hayes deals exposed. The moment I saw the news notification pop up on my phone, I knew. Margot. She had followed through with what she had promised. For years, Vivian had operated in the shadows, keeping her financial dealings under tight control, ensuring that nothing could ever be traced back to her. But Margot Whitmore had money, power, and, most importantly, connections. And when someone like Margot decided to take you down, there was nowhere to hide. Vivian's bank accounts were frozen. Her closest allies in Boston's social scene distanced themselves overnight. She had spent decades building an empire, and in a matter of hours, it had collapsed. Callum sat at a cafe in the Back Bay district, staring blankly at the newspaper in front of him. He had known his mother played dirty, but even he hadn't been prepared for this. The phone in his hand felt heavier than it should. He knew he should call her, demand to know the truth. But deep down, he already knew. Vivian had spent years warning him about people like Isolde, telling him that she was nothing more than a gold digger. And yet, the real con artist had been under his roof all along. He closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. How had he been so blind? Vivian sat alone in her estate, a half-empty glass of wine in hand, watching her empire crumble. The world outside was turning against her. The walls were closing in. But she wasn't finished just yet. She picked up her phone, dialing one last number. The smear campaign against me started the very next morning. I woke up to my phone vibrating relentlessly against the nightstand. A flood of missed calls, unread texts, and email notifications cluttered my screen. Something was wrong, very wrong. My stomach twisted as I opened the first message. Isolde, have you seen the news? You need to. My breath caught. Tapping on the link, a headline in bold letters nearly made me drop my phone. Gold-digging nurse destroyed one of Boston's most powerful families? My pulse pounded as I skimmed through the article. It was vile, full of anonymous sources and twisted half-truths. It painted me as a manipulative woman who had preyed on Callum's wealth, driven Julius to break off his engagement, and orchestrated the downfall of the Hayes empire. She played the long game, one source claimed. She knew exactly what she was doing. Another section speculated about my marriage to Callum. Sources close to the family say Isolde never truly loved Callum Hayes. She was always after the status. Once she got what she wanted, she discarded him and moved on. Every word was a carefully crafted lie, designed to make me look like the villain. I gripped the phone so tightly, my fingers ached. Vivian. This had her fingerprints all over it. At the hospital, whispers followed me down the hall. Nurses I had barely spoken to suddenly knew me. Some gave me sympathetic glances. Others avoided eye contact altogether. I felt my professionalism slipping, my hands trembling as I prepared to check a patient's vitals. The weight of their stares clung to me like a second skin. By lunchtime, my supervisor pulled me into her office, concern written all over her face. "I'm sure you know why I called you in," she began. I nodded stiffly, my jaw clenched. "The hospital board is worried about the attention," she sighed. "You're a great nurse, Isolde, but if this continues, we might have to reevaluate your position here." Anger flared up, hot and undeniable. I had worked my entire career with integrity. I had spent years earning my place in this field. And now, because of Vivian's desperate need for control, I was at risk of losing it all. Number I refused to let her win. That evening, I made a call of my own. "Vivian wants a war?" I said to the lawyer on the other end. "Then let's give her one." 2 days later, Margot Whitmore called me. "I warned you about Vivian," she said smoothly. "But this? This is desperate." I pressed the phone against my ear, staring out over the New York skyline. "She's trying to salvage what little power she has left." Margot chuckled. "Then she's made a mistake. Because when people like Vivian get desperate, they get sloppy. And sloppy means vulnerable." She wasn't wrong. Vivian had always been calculating, careful never to leave behind evidence. But a smear campaign this public? She had gone too far. "I hope you're ready," Margot added, "because if I know Vivian, she won't stop here." I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Neither will I." Callum stood at the entrance of the Hayes estate, his fists clenched. He had spent years defending his mother, making excuses, justifying her cruelty because that was easier than admitting the truth. But this was unforgivable. His own mother had destroyed the woman he loved. And for what? To protect a reputation that was already in ruins? The moment he stepped inside, he found her in the grand sitting room, sipping her usual evening tea, as if she hadn't just tried to ruin someone's life. She glanced up at him, unbothered. "Callum, how nice of you to visit." His anger boiled over. "What the hell did you do?" Vivian sighed, setting her teacup down. "Is that really how you greet your mother?" Callum didn't take the bait. "That article, the lies about Isolde, you're behind it." She didn't deny it. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, regarding him like a misbehaving child. "You're upset. I understand. But Callum, this is how the world works. She embarrassed our family. There are consequences." Callum let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you?" Vivian raised a brow. "Get what?" His voice dropped, filled with something lethal. "You don't have a family anymore." For the first time, Vivian's expression faltered. Callum turned, his steps heavy as he walked toward the door. But just before he stepped out, she spoke again. Her voice calm, unshaken. "I did what I had to do." Callum didn't look back. "And now? You can live with it." Then he was gone. Vivian sat motionless, the crackling fireplace the only sound in the vast emptiness of the estate. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wineglass. She had lost everything, but she wasn't finished just yet. A slow smirk curved her lips as she picked up her phone and made one last call. Margot's warning came the next morning. Isolde, she's planning something worse. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. I was standing in my tiny kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air, but suddenly I had lost my appetite. Define worse, I said, my voice low. Margot sighed on the other end. She's going after your career. The smear campaign was just the beginning. She's contacted your hospital's board, claiming you've engaged in medical malpractice. She wants to make sure you never work again. A sharp pang shot through my chest. I had expected Vivian to retaliate, but this was a new level of cruelty. Destroying my reputation in high society was one thing, but trying to take away the one thing I had left? My job? My livelihood? My voice was calmer than I felt. Do you have proof? Not yet. But I know Vivian. She's probably feeding them just enough fabricated evidence to make them question you. My stomach churned. The hospital board had already been wary of the media storm surrounding me. If Vivian gave them even the slightest excuse, they wouldn't hesitate to cut me loose. I exhaled, trying to steady myself. Then I'll fight. Margot's voice softened. Be careful, Isolde. She's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I hung up, my mind already racing. By the time I arrived at the hospital, a strange energy hummed in the air. Some of my colleagues glanced at me with uncertainty. Others avoided eye contact entirely. It was happening. I barely had time to drop my bag before my supervisor called me into her office. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. Dr. Hughes, the hospital administrator, sat across from me, his expression unreadable. Have a seat, Isolde. I did. He folded his hands together on the desk. You're aware of the situation surrounding your name in the press? I nodded, forcing myself to remain composed. Dr. Hughes sighed. We've received an anonymous report accusing you of improper patient care, fabricating records, and violating hospital protocols. The words felt like a slap. That's a lie, I said immediately. Be that as it may, the board has to investigate. His gaze flickered to the file in front of him. These claims are serious. We need to determine if there's any validity to them before making any decisions regarding your employment. My pulse pounded. This was exactly what Vivian wanted. To make me look guilty, to bury me under so much scrutiny that even innocence wouldn't save me. I looked toward the other person in the room, Dr. Patel, a colleague I had worked with for years. She had always been fair. She had always trusted me. Now she hesitated. It was subtle, a brief flicker in her expression, before she nodded and said, I've never witnessed any misconduct from Isolde. The hesitation gutted me, because it meant that someone, even someone who had always believed in me, had doubted. Vivian had done that. I swallowed past the tightness in my throat and sat straighter. I want to see the allegations. Every word of them. Dr. Hughes nodded. You'll be provided access during the review process. I exhaled slowly. Then I'll wait. But in my mind, I was already planning my next move. Back in Boston, Callum stared at the headlines with a growing sense of fury. Hospital under pressure to fire disgraced nurse Isolde Hayes, the woman who took down Boston's elite. He shoved the newspaper aside, disgust curling in his stomach. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. She was actively destroying Isolde's life, and he wasn't going to stand for it. Within an hour, he was standing at the gates of the Hayes estate. He stormed into the house, past the butler who stammered out a greeting, and found his mother in the sunroom, sipping her usual afternoon tea. Vivian barely glanced at him. Darling, must you always barge in like some common brute? Callum slammed the newspaper onto the table in front of her. What the hell is this? Vivian sighed, picking up the paper with a delicate hand. Oh, Callum, you're so dramatic. His blood boiled. You're trying to destroy her. Vivian set the newspaper down and folded her hands neatly in her lap. No, darling, I'm ensuring she never comes back. Callum's fists clenched. You've gone too far. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Have I? You don't get to decide who I love, he said, voice like steel. You don't get to manipulate people's lives because you didn't get your way. Vivian's eyes darkened. I did what I had to do to protect our family, and you're too blinded by her to see it. Callum shook his head. You don't have a family anymore, Mother. Vivian stilled, but Callum didn't wait for a reaction. He turned and walked away. This time, he wasn't looking back. I sat across from my lawyer, gripping the evidence in my hands. Printouts of every false claim, every email, every planted rumor Vivian had used against me. She thought she could bury me. She thought she could erase me. She was wrong. This wasn't just a fight for my reputation anymore. It was a fight for my future. Vivian never backed down from a fight. But neither did I. The morning my legal team officially filed the defamation lawsuit against her, the media went into a frenzy. News anchors debated the case, tabloids dissected every detail, and social media turned into a battleground. Some still called me a gold digger, a woman who had infiltrated an elite family and destroyed it from the inside. But others, many others, were starting to see the truth. Boston's Ice Queen faces court battle. Has Vivian Hayes finally lost control? Exclusive. Lawsuit filed against Hayes matriarch for malicious defamation. Vivian Hayes' empire in ruins. Was it all a lie? I sat in my apartment, watching as the headlines rolled in. This was what Vivian feared most. Not losing money, but losing power. The battle lines had been drawn. And this time, I wasn't the one backing down. Serafina's world was falling apart faster than she could keep up. She sat in her penthouse, scrolling through an endless stream of ignored messages. Brands that once showered her with designer clothes and lucrative deals had gone silent. Her bank accounts, once limitless, now showed restrictions. Her mother had promised they would win. But Vivian was losing. And now, so was she. The moment she realized her last credit card had been frozen, panic set in. She picked up her phone, dialing a number she never thought she'd call. "Julius, please," she whispered, swallowing her pride. "I just need to talk." His voice was cold, distant. "There's nothing left to say, Serafina." The line went dead. Her vision blurred as she stared at the empty screen. For the first time in her life, there was no one to rescue her, and that terrified her. She exhaled shakily, fingers tightening around the phone. There was one way out. She knew how this world worked. When the powerful fell, they always took someone else down with them. Serafina took a deep breath and called a journalist. The next morning, the world woke up to the biggest headline yet. Serafina Hayes breaks silence. My mother manipulated everything. I nearly dropped my coffee. Serafina had turned on Vivian. I clicked the article, scanning the bold words. I was raised to be perfect, to be obedient. But the truth is, I was just a puppet. My mother orchestrated everything, the engagement, the humiliation of Isolde, the media attacks. And now that it's falling apart, I refuse to go down with her. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Vivian had spent years crafting an empire of influence, controlling everyone around her. Now, the only person who could have saved her, her own daughter, had set fire to the last of it. Vivian sat motionless in her grand estate, staring at the screen. Serafina's face, once her pride and joy, now stared back at her with cold detachment. Her own daughter had betrayed her. She set the tablet down, pressing trembling fingers to her temples. The phone calls had stopped. The invitations had dried up. She had been erased. For the first time in decades, Vivian Hayes had no power, no control, no allies, just herself. And for the first time, that wasn't enough. I stood by the window of my apartment, the city stretching out before me. The battle was over. Vivian had lost. I had won. But as I stared at my reflection in the glass, exhaustion settled deep in my bones. Because even when the battle is over, the scars remain. In the aftermath of everything, I had one final decision to make. The lawsuit was nearing its conclusion. My legal team had gathered overwhelming evidence, and Vivian's lawyers had started pushing for a quiet settlement rather than a drawn-out trial. Public perception had shifted. The same media that once labeled me a manipulative gold digger now called me the woman who took down Boston's most powerful matriarch. But none of that mattered in this moment. Because as I sat in my small apartment, sipping coffee and looking out at the Manhattan skyline, my mind wasn't on Vivian, the case, or the headlines. It was on Callum. He arrived in New York unannounced. I had just finished a long shift at the hospital when I stepped out into the cool evening air and saw him leaning against a street lamp across the road. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, I walked toward him. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Hey," I echoed. I had imagined this moment so many times, had rehearsed all the things I wanted to say, but now that he was standing in front of me, I found myself at a loss. He looked different. Not in the physical sense. He was still the same Callum, tall and composed, his hands shoved into his coat pockets like he was bracing for the cold. But there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. "I cut ties with my mother," he said without preamble. I studied his face, searching for hesitation, doubt. But there was none. "I don't want the life I had before," he continued. "I don't want the money, the name, the expectations. I just—" He exhaled, his breath visible in the crisp night air. "I want a future with you, Isolde." His words should have felt like a victory. But instead of answering, I just stood there. For so long, I had waited for him to choose me. And now that he finally had, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. I don't know, Callum, I admitted quietly. I don't know if we can go back. His expression flickered with something, regret, maybe, or understanding. I'm not asking to go back, he said. I'm asking if there's a way forward. Vivian sat alone in the grand estate she once ruled. The curtains were drawn, the chandeliers dimmed, the vast house empty. For weeks she had fought, tried to salvage her reputation, called in every favor she had left. But the doors she once walked through so effortlessly had now shut in her face. The whispers of admiration had turned into murmurs of disdain. Even those who had feared her once now avoided her entirely. She reached for the phone, hesitating only a moment before dialing. The call went to voicemail. She tried again. Still nothing. Vivian set the phone down, her manicured fingers trembling against the polished mahogany table. Serafina had cut her off. Her own daughter. Once, Vivian had controlled Serafina's every move, shaped her into the perfect reflection of the Hayes legacy. But now, Serafina was no longer taking orders. And for the first time in Vivian Hayes's life, she had no one left to command. Serafina, meanwhile, sat in a small upscale cafe, nursing a cappuccino. She had received the calls, of course. She had seen her mother's name flash across her screen more times than she could count. And for the first time in her life, she ignored them. She wasn't innocent, not by any stretch. She had played her part in the cruelty, reveled in it, even. But watching her mother fall had been like watching herself in 20 years. And she wanted more than that. For now, she was alone. Not the center of attention, not the darling of Boston's elite, not the woman everyone wanted to be. Just Serafina. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. Callum and I walked through Central Park in silence, the faint hum of the city around us. I'm not asking for an answer right now, he said finally. I just needed you to know where I stand. I nodded, inhaling the crisp autumn air. There was still love here, I knew that. But love had never been the problem. Love hadn't stopped Vivian from destroying me. Love hadn't stopped Callum from hesitating when it mattered most. Maybe love wasn't enough. But for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself first. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. For years, I thought love meant sacrificing pieces of myself to fit into someone else's world. I thought that if I stayed, if I endured, if I just proved my worth enough, I would finally be accepted. But the truth is, acceptance should never come at the cost of your own identity. Walking away wasn't just about leaving a toxic family, it was about reclaiming myself. I learned that waiting for someone to choose you will only leave you empty. You have to choose yourself first. I learned that standing up for your truth may cost you everything, but losing yourself is an even higher price to pay. So let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you stayed silent just to keep the peace? Have you ever sacrificed your happiness to fit into someone else's expectations? At what point do we finally say, enough? I want you to take this story as more than just entertainment. Take it as a reminder that you are worth more than the spaces that try to diminish you. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and no one, no family member, no partner, no job, has the right to take that away from you. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Drop a 1 if you've ever had to fight for yourself, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Let me know what didn't work for you. Most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this. Because at the end of the day, we all have a story to tell, and I can't wait to share more with you.